everyone, and welcome to another Making the Rounds. It's time to talk about Group B, which, my opinion, was, I don't know, maybe the slightly less developed sister of Group A, just like not as attractive, not as mature, but, you know, a hell of a lot of fun. She'll show you a good time. Anyway, the first... Let's start from the bottom again. We're going to talk about PGM Pentagram, because I'd like to think of them as Pentagram because they had to invoke the dark arts to make it to this tournament. They just, from my perspective, relative to the other teams in either group, their mistakes were much more basic. Things like,
yes,
I do not understand how to play this matchup. I do not know how to evolve, which ability to evolve on my champion. I don't know anything. I'm not even going to start talking about win conditions. I'm just going to run at you as 5 and hope that you do not mow me down. That's kind of how I felt about PGM. Maybe you have nicer things to say about them.
Not really. I always feel kind of badly when you look at a team and you're like, okay, even on like a basic mechanical level, they aren't where the other teams are in this play-in, and that happens somewhat frequently when we see Japanese teams because their region is just that much more behind generally. I mean, this is the old, for people who don't know, this is kind of the old Rampage org, sort of, after they screwed over Dara and Tussle. So you can read about that. There have been a few articles written about that. But this team without those two players looks a lot more lost, in my opinion. They kind of just, like, when they were in Japan, they would just kind of sit back and wait for opponents to make even worse mistakes than them, and obviously that wasn't going to work at this tournament just because they are, like, I hate to keep bringing this up, but like they're just significantly behind on like a basic mechanical level. Like when we look at teams, sometimes we look at a team like Kingzone, for example, where you have a bunch of players that their mechanics are just that strong, so even if they fuck up something in game, they might be able to overcome their opponents just based on like raw mechanical outplays. This is kind of the inverse of that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to say about this team, unfortunately. I just think that in terms of how they won in Japan with waiting for their opponents to make mistakes, and also the fact that they weren't even necessarily expected to be the Japanese representative, according to what happened in season with DFM, that I think, yeah, it was a rough showing from them, but it wasn't, I don't think how they played was particularly unexpected.
I'm gonna ask you to clarify that a little bit, but first I'm just gonna go on a mini rant where I don't even blame Zyrene for this, but when their teams are not playing aggressively, or they're not invading, or they're not looking for picks, or they're not fighting, that doesn't mean they're a macro team, okay? That's macro and fighting are not two opposite things. I get that Zyrene probably on the cast was thinking, I have to find a positive way to say this, but it's just bad. They were just bad. They didn't have good macro. They didn't have a macro critical way of looking at the map and playing around their opponents. No, they just did nothing. They did nothing. That's not good macro at all. That's not macro-oriented play. Can we please stop with the if you fight, you're not playing good macro thing? Thank you. That's all I got. Anyway, could you talk a little bit more about the Detonation FM PGM thing? Because I think not everyone probably understands.
Oh, yeah. So it's just Detonation Focus Me were the primary team that people expected because they performed a lot better in season. And then I keep wanting to say Rampage, but Pentagram upset them in the finals. And so, yeah, that's basically it. And just, you know, it's they did it.
Do you think Detonation Focus Me would have performed better, or?
In my opinion, from what I saw, they're a little bit more aggressive, I guess, in terms of like individuals, but not particularly. I just think that unfortunately Japan is in a really rough spot in terms of how much talent they have and kind of how it's all like locked in one place. I don't know if some of the teams with Korean players are able maybe to reach out to, I had heard in the past that they were able to reach out maybe to some like KR Challenger teams or developing teams, but I don't know if that still happens as well. I don't know if it happened with Pentagram at all. But that's kind of the thing that Japanese teams really need in order to kind of step out of how their region is very, like, it's pretty much only been 2 teams coming out of Japan, right? It's either Rampage or it's Dead FM, and they're always at the top. And it's just really, I think it's just really difficult for them to improve even in like basic macro play, since they don't necessarily see it coming out of their own region. I mean, I'm sure I'll revisit that later as we talk about Brazil specifically as well.
Yeah, and I haven't watched a lot of LJL, but I used to a couple of years ago, and it was just, from what I understand is that it's still very stagnant in terms of how their play develops. They just kind of are very slow, they don't really do much throughout the game. Eventually someone is just able to 1v5 and is extremely fed and the game ends or something like this. I don't know if you want more specifics on how they played out and why I'm flaming them so hard. Like, first game, they play Zoe into LeBlanc. Zoe should get the push in that matchup really early, but she doesn't, which allows the enemy jungler to come in and get Kha'Zix, who is on his Raptors, which, by the way, if your mid laner should get pushed, you should not do Raptors second on Kha'Zix. They end up being really far behind as the mid jungle duo. Kha'Zix goes for some ridiculous, like, all-in 1v3 trying to get a kill by evolving Q at level 6, which is just really, really silly. And then they get to a point where Zoe has no pressure on the top side of the map. They cannot contest for Baron Vision at all, and the game just kind of ends on them. And it's just sad. You get to the second game, they have this really weird draft where there's no answer. I just don't understand what they're supposed to do with this composition, just straight up. Like, I have zero idea how they're supposed to play out Gnar into Gangplank and Ryze. Okay, so that should be their strongest split pushing threat. They cannot answer Ryze split push. Gangplank is going to outscale in terms of team fighting and also pressure. You have Karmazaya, which theoretically should give you a lot of team fighting power, but generally speaking, Gangplank's ability to teamfight, Ryze's sideline pressure, there's no answer here at all. I don't know. And then Karma is just like not that useful as the game progresses outside of really empowering your AD carry or your top laner. If you have like a Camille, this answers so much more. Right now I just have no idea what that team's supposed to do except lose. And then it kind of gets worse after that. They continue to make mistakes like this that are just very fundamental, and it feels like this team just doesn't belong here. Even as we're going to heavily criticize a bunch of other teams, it just feels like this region, or this team in particular, was the worst at the tournament. And I think this should be hammered home, because if their own critics aren't criticizing them, if other people aren't criticizing them, then they probably won't figure out how to change stuff if they're playing the same way for several years. So that's all I've got to say. Okay. Now that we have flamed EGM alive, let's continue on to Dire Wolves. Everyone's favorite Oceanic league. It's funny because this reminded me a lot of EU Masters, for those of you who watched EU Masters, because the casters a lot of the casters were from Australia, right? So they were really excited about the OPL doing well on the first day, and then this became like the main subject of the desk, which is very strange. It's a lot like the EU Masters when the UK teams were doing well, and everyone kept talking. They weren't actually even doing that well. They were doing pretty shit, to be honest. But that's all that people were talking about, was the UK teams, and I was just like, okay guys, let's talk about something else. Let's move on. But what did you think of the direwolves, Emily?
So I didn't listen to. I tweeted about this, but I'm trying to listen to the Korean cast to improve my Korean. So I haven't really actually listened to a lot of the English casting from these groups. Direwolves. This seems like a team that I believe they boot camped before this. So on day one, they performed better than I thought they would, to be quite honest. And day two, they performed about how I thought they would. The biggest thing with them is that they will do something right, and then they'll immediately make like the absolute worst. So they'll get a team fight, or they'll set their side waves or something, and then they'll decide to do something that's completely counterintuitive that they should not do. And I know you'll probably bring this up, but a prime example of this yesterday was the Baron that they had that was just like, you could bait that. You can, they made a lot of other mistakes, but I think this is kind of like a microcosm of decision making that you could look at some of the mistakes they made in
which game
trying to choose I believe it was against Kabum'd. Yeah, it was against Kabum'd.
Okay.
When they decide to go for like a 21-minute Baron, I think. And they just start doing the Baron, and there's a Kabum'd pink ward there that they don't clear. And they could have easily, this was with the Yasuo comp as well, and they could easily have baited that, right? Because you can play with vision, you can play with Fog of War as long as you clear out that pink ward. With this comp, they have several knockups that are looking to facilitate the Yasuo mid, and despite the fact that Kabum'd targeted mid and they did kind of keep the Yasuo down initially, direwolves were still able to facilitate him in team fights. And instead of doing that, they just drew the Baron, and I don't think they get aced, but they basically lose a team fight, and Kabum'd gets the Baron, and then they win off of that. And it's there are so many smaller decisions within the larger decision of looking at the Baron as an objective that they could have done, and they picked the absolute worst call, in my opinion.
Are you talking about the time where they had just won a dragon fight and then they go for Baron?
Yeah.
That was just for me a misunderstanding of resets also, because it's okay, you just won a Baron fight. When you just won a dragon fight, they're going to come back from their base having reset, and you're just gonna go straight to Baron and act like you can take it without refreshing, without buying the items and using the advantage that you just gained. It was just really, really bad. It was just not understanding tempo or anything of that nature. But yeah.
Yeah, there were also there was the one.
These are we're able to discuss actual team-based decision making, so that still makes them slightly better than PGM. So let's just continue on that. Anyway, hi.
There was also the part where they chased Thresh. They could have gone for an objective, but instead they chased Riev through their own into their own base, and I'm just just leave him alone. Let him die or whatever. It doesn't matter. You can take something off of this. You have an advantage that you just then kind of handed back because you decided to chase the Thresh. Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, I know people are probably going to look at the Yasuo comp and be they shouldn't have run this at all. This was
I think the
shit,
Yasuo comp was fine.
Yeah, it was, the draft order was pretty ballsy, but in terms of what they had for the Yasuo, they have the Ornn and the Alistar. So I thought the comp worked together pretty well, but in terms of their execution, especially when it came to team fights, they didn't play around vision correctly, and they basically allowed Kabum'd to kite back and then set up their Jhin where they really shouldn't have been able to. And it allowed Jin to like set up and then Xantans to get off some pretty good Gangplank ults. I'm using this game as a microcosm just because of that Baron I thought was like just a really glaring point in Direwolf's decision making. But in terms of like,
they didn't in their comp, they didn't have like a super good way to get to the backline. I felt that would be more what I would talk about, because you have Alistair has to dive back really, really far. Other than Ornn ult, you don't really have a whole lot of ways to get into the backline. Like Skarna can get forced out pretty easily by Threshbox. Like Gangplank is gonna zone really hard. Anyone who tries to dive Jin is gonna get LeBlanc'd. So I think that there was, and then of course you still have the repositioning tool from Thresh, and Olaf will just like mow down anyone who tries to get past front lines. So it's just really kind of, I mean, I really liked actually Kabum'd's comp in this game. Like I really like the Gangplank Jin combination. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the Yasuo was my problem as much as just getting to outside of Ornn ult, like getting to Jin, I think was difficult for this competition.
The vision from both of these teams was pretty.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that later when we get to Flash Wolves.
I mean, like I think Direwolves stuff to work on is just like,
for me,
looking at what you have and then making decisions.
Look at your draft. Just look at it. Look at the champions. Decide what you're gonna do based on the champions. Do you know what the champions do? No. For me, I guess yours is a very broad point, but my more specific complaint with them had to do with, I don't think they know where their strong side is, or maybe they have the mentality of, we're going to play to weak side to shut down. This is like kind of similar to Gambit when I was talking about yesterday, where it's their mentality is, oh, we have to shut down their strong side, but after a while their strong side gets really strong and you aren't even necessarily guaranteed to win a 2v1 anymore versus a top laner or something like that. And you just need to play to your strong side. You need to play to where you have your advantage. Like for example, we have it on day 1, I think it was. Yeah, day 2, excuse me. This was the first day that these guys played. You had a situation where Kabum'd are playing, or Direwolves are playing with a Camille comp. And it was just the entire game, I just go bottom, gank the Ornn. Ornn cannot do shit against Camille Trundle. You have to do this before Baron spawns. You have to get tier 1 on bot side before Baron spawns. If you do that, you win the game. I guarantee it. Takes for fucking ever. Eventually, PGM make a terrible mistake that allows everyone to go bot. Ornn dies instantly. And then what do? Once Camille has 2 items, she groups and fights a Baron, and I'm just like, why is this happening to me right here? They win this game anyway, because PGM have other problems, but it's just very strange. And then also, I mean, it just got to this point where, oh right, in the very first day, they invade on weak side, right? They invade on their weak side to kind of throw the enemy team off or something like this and force them to play on the top side, but you guys don't realize that by forcing the enemy team on the top side, you're also not playing to your strong side, guys. You're not doing it. You're not going to snowball your lane. Their lane is probably going to naturally get the push anyway, so it's going to be risky to play to that side. Just a lot of weird things that Direwolves did. I actually have similar complaints with Kabum'd, but Direwolves had a worse understanding of, like, as we just went over, of resets and when they have tempo. Like, I don't think Direwolves understand tempo as a concept, or when they can make a play, or when they have an advantage. So,
I mean, you saw that even in their very first game against Supermassive, I believe, where they, on day 1, where they, like, they go for the play bot, but then give up like almost the entirety of their jungle due to the way they play around it. I believe it was the Supermassive game. Yeah, and I was just like, you just basically had all the advantages and you said, here, I'm going to give them to you, Supermassive. Like, take them because I don't want them. And then it's just like, yeah, that was really frustrating too, because I felt like, well,
just it's all the same stuff. So
yeah,
because they had tempo if they just backed. If they back and then go for vision, then they have priority on the Baron as soon as the enemy team respawns, because the enemy team is dead. It's a fairly simple, basic concept, but yeah, a lot of this stuff is just like fundamentals and can really improve these types of teams. And I know that it's easy to say this and it's harder to fix it, but it's just like constantly pointing out where you're making these mistakes and retraining your brain, I guess. Anyway.
And again, it's hard because Oceania is another example of a region that is very much isolated, right? And we talked about, I believe we brought it up in the last video, but like in terms of what we expect from teams like Supermassive and like Gambit, because they are able to sometimes scrim, you know, EUCS teams, lower tier EU LCS teams. Like if you are able to go up against
teams now.
Yeah, if you are able, I didn't even think of that, but if you're able to go up against better opponents, that's why I'm kind of wondering about LJ. I'll have to ask some people over there in terms of what their scrim setup is like. But Oceania is kind of in a dire situation, no pun intended, with in regards to that as well, right? Because once you get to the top of the region, like who do you face? You have to basically travel and boot camp in order to be able to improve, because and this is something that I'm going to bring up again with Kabum'd, but when you're used to winning a ton in your own region and then you get to the top, it's going to be that much more difficult to fix those issues if you're not being punished for them in game. Like even if you can understand conceptually what you're doing wrong, even if you do understand that, even if you can look at a VOD and say like, here's where we messed up here, we should have backed here, we should have reset here, we should have set vision correctly here. If you're not getting punished for it in game, it's that much more difficult to fix as well. So
yeah, I also
and now
Kabum'd.
Oh no, go Kabum'd.
Yeah, let's talk about Kabum'd. I actually think Kabum'd and Direwolves ended up being similar level teams overall. Obviously, they won like 2 extra games, but one of those was
one of them was a random solo queue game when both teams were already set. So
yeah. So I think that they had similar problems, but because Kabum'd did actually have a better handle on like when we should back with advantage and stuff like this than Direwolves, for example, than Direwolves did. So that was what I think made them a little bit better. So they did probably deserve at least 1 extra win. But I guess for me, like, even when you just talk about, like, okay, I was specifically watching the game versus Supermassive on first day with, Heartlock, who's an ex-analyst for Team Vitality, and we got to this point where we were looking at the Kabum'd and Supermassive comps, and we ended up arguing whether or not Kabum's draft was bad because they were very obviously not going to execute it correctly. Like, Kabum's draft that game was good. I actually think that their draft is good, but they played it like shit. They ganked every lane that they were not supposed to gank. They had Nocturne diving mid lane when you need to get Camille ahead in this competition. Like, I don't know why it's so difficult for people to grasp, like, what Camille does. And then they ended up playing bot and losing like 2v3 bot because they couldn't match the Caitlyn Thresh lane. They ended up then diving mid when their jungler had disadvantage, and Cassiopeia had just hit level 6, and I was just like, okay, this was an interesting, just go top, guys, honestly. Just Camille, Shen, like eventually Camille will get to a point where she just like half health Shen, her cooldowns will be much shorter than his, like she should win the duel. Like, I know a long time ago it felt like Shen sometimes beat Camille, it was more of a skill matchup, but Camille just flat out destroys him, and you can win the game off of that. Your comp actually has a lot of answers, you can pale the karma. Like, once Camille gets to laning, combining that with the Nocturne's ability to one-shot, and no one will be able to answer her ever. Like, it's just over. So, I don't really understand. And then you also have strong push from Karma. You can have Braum to reset the whip. So this competition was good. It was just played completely poorly. It was just executed completely poorly. And I don't know. It's difficult to discuss because I don't think, like, in those cases, I don't think that means the draft is bad. I just think that fundamentals and understanding is missing, and that's why I would rather talk about, like, execution.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Kabum'd is that, again, like, I think we also saw that when they aren't able to get, and this is really common of teams that consistently stay at the top of their region for the regular season, and now Kabum'd was actually not supposed to do that. Like, this was a team that most people pegged to go back down to relegations, and they ended up having, so within Brazil, they ended up having a pretty good understanding of, like, Baron and certain mid-game setups, a lot better than other teams. But in terms of their leads, a lot of them were off of, like, I'm not going to say they're always executing how they get their leads correctly. So when that is actually punished on this stage, I don't think they knew what to do once they started getting punished for it. They were just like, it was like watching them continue to try to do the same thing over and over again without realizing why it caused the deficit in the first place. And then they couldn't get to the mid game where they have previously had, like, pretty good Baron vision set up and an understanding of, like, how to leverage that objective. And then on day 2, you saw them with these comps where they were more accurately able to identify how to snowball, especially a jungle advantage from Ranger. And suddenly then they looked a lot better because once they had the lead going into the mid game, they then knew, okay, like, we've been here before, we can do this because we know this fundamental.
And a lot of their advantages just come from, like, knowing when to back with advantage, which can get you so much in a region like this, or just even a major region, just knowing when, oh, okay, we just want to fight, we should back here, or, oh, we just pushed this tower, we have tempo and topside, we should back and go top, or something like this. Just knowing when your best back timings are can actually matter a lot in terms of maintaining advantage. So even if they can't, like, snowball it or they can't push it further, the fact that they're able to keep advantages in a lot of situations just usually will mean that they have a good understanding of when to back. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, like, so, like, I know a lot of fans, or, like, Brazil in general, because of their weird history of almost making it kind of, and then if they do make to main stage, taking, like, one random game off of a major region team. That's kind of an upset. But I do think that this once again shows that, unfortunately, Brazil, again, we talked about Japan, talked about Oceania, Brazil has another similar issue where they're not able to, once you get to the top of Brazil, you then have to boot camp or go somewhere, face other teams in order to improve beyond what the region itself is. And Brazil is also in a very weird situation where you do have, like, 2 or 3 teams typically around the top that you need to learn and prepare for and be able to play well against within the region, and then you have to almost, like, not relearn, because I don't think that's the right way to say it, but, like, you need to better understand how to play the game on a greater level, like, in terms of macro play, in order to then take the next step up. And that's where, like, Brazilian teams historically, even when they have boot camped, have just really, really struggled. So I didn't expect Kabum'd to make it out of this group, not only because I thought Supermassive was just a stronger team in general, but also because of that issue, because it's really difficult for Brazil as a region to improve because they are unfortunately landlocked.
Okay, we've gone through and flamed everyone. Notice we haven't really flamed the players. Like, I'm not gonna say these players are shit and they shouldn't go. I'm mostly just talking about stuff that they can learn by watching other games, by playing against other teams, and just fundamentals and how to play the game and macro and stuff like this. That can improve the team considerably, so I'm not flaming the players. I think the players are fine. Yay!
Yep.
And a lot of them actually show some good ideas and some diversity in their playstyle and an ability to do a lot with the little or to just kind of take over and carry games. So there are like some good players in these regions. It's just about overall team structure and ability to play at a high level. So let's talk about Supermassive.
Woo! So yeah, Supermassive, in my opinion, actually performed slightly worse than I thought they would.
I did not have expectations of them either way. Other than GBM has a very interesting champion pool. And that's really all I expected from them. He actually, in that sense, they kind of let me down a little bit, you know? There were no...
He only played the TF in one game. Oh, he played Kaisa mid in the one random game,
really
but...
weird, but yeah. Yeah, there wasn't nearly as much stuff going on. There was no Alawi mid or anything of that nature going into these games. But I think that Supermassive had a fairly good idea of what they wanted to do. It basically kept things pretty simple. Yeah, I wasn't insanely impressed by them, but they looked better. They looked really good in the context of their group, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think... So, again, they performed slightly worse than what I thought. However, I do think that the suspicions that this team was significantly ahead in terms of just, again, like, basic macro play, how to leverage objectives, how to just look at the map and execute pressure or retain pressure. I think they were ahead in all of those respects to all of their opponents. I would also put them ahead of Gambit in that respect as well. I think once they and this isn't like a Kabum'd, once they have the lead, they can leverage an objective and then execute it and set it up correctly. We saw, like, even on day 2 against Pentagram, the first game, where as soon as they managed to get Baron, they basically set up 1-3-1 and Pentagram was like, what is this? And they ended up taking almost everything off of the map after that point. So this is a team that does know how to immediately punish opponents' mistakes and then execute something like that correctly, which I think is another thing to point out that put them ahead of a lot of the other teams in this group stage. I'm
not sure if this was a product of Supermassive coming in and people thinking they were the strongest team, but and like setting up really early cheese strategies, but it seemed to happen in a lot of situations where Supermassive was reacting to play as well, rather than setting stuff up, and almost every other team in the group was taking the initiative. And then Supermassive would exploit the fact that they were playing to the wrong side of the map and snowball on that and be able to eventually contest them and say, okay, we're reacting to your mistake, we're taking advantage off of your mistake, and I felt like that was a lot of how this went. So I wasn't necessarily super impressed by Supermassive's like initial plays or their early game setups, but I thought that their ability to react when the opponent made a mistake was really good.
And the fact that they
better mid-late lane assignments. Like I always, one of the things I really look at for teams is their ability to balance waves in the mid to late game when they're sieging, and Supermassive like are better at that than some of the teams we'll see in the next round, like Evos or Flash Wolves. So yeah, I liked a lot of the things from that sense, but I'm not really 100% convinced on Supermassive's early game setups if the enemy team doesn't make the initial mistake, you know? Like, even against PGM, in today's games, in the game against PGM, we had an instance where Supermassive are actually losing pressure in both mid and top, right? And then so PGM have the ability to play to bot really, really hard, and Supermassive make a mistake in their execution by having Shen teleport bot, and he's just gonna lose a whole lot on the side of the map, or he's using Shen ult bot, and he's just gonna lose a whole lot on that side of the map. He's going to end up, you have a situation where Karma ends up losing a lot in those lanes just for them reacting bot. But then PGM, throughout the rest of the game, make that same mistake by playing to, like, the lane that they're weak in, right, instead of their strong lanes, and they give up leads and Supermassive trade for mid and top or whatever instead, and it's just like really, really weird, and they end up opting into Supermassive's grouping after that over and over again, and it was just a really weird game. But Supermassive's initial setups and their initial response in the early game to what the enemy team was doing, I did not like, as well as some of the stuff that they did mid-late, so.
Yeah, and I don't know, I did see them, so like when they were in Turkey, they were a little bit more proactive in their early game. But again, a lot of their games did come down to, so not only what they like to do is kind of unlock Snowflower, because either him and Zeetnot will like stomp lane together and take first turret and unlock him, or they'll leave Zeetnot in a 2v1 and then he can rotate mid or whatever, or set vision. Stomaged actually had some interesting early game stuff, especially in their final, with exploiting the level 2 bot gank that we've seen a lot of teams try. So I think in that regard, in terms of how Supermassive were able to dominate, I still think it is about like punishing mistakes and stuff like we saw in that Pentagram series, where once they do get like a Baron or something, they know how to execute the, you know, 1-3-1 or something like that, like pretty well. But they were slightly less aggressive in this tournament than what I saw from them in Turkey. So that's also something to point out, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they really didn't have to be, especially in a lot of instances, was part of the issue. It was just like when they were taking initiative in some of their plays, I didn't necessarily like their logic as much. But I liked the fact that they also just got so much. They got like the GP Jin combination for free. So they generally have a good sense for how they want to set up their compositions. Like whenever they paired Shen, they paired it with like some sort of assassin or engage mage, like Cassiopeia. Yeah, there were just like things that I liked about how they were thinking about setting up their compositions and their team structure. So yeah, it was nice. Anyway, we've talked enough about this group. Let's discuss the next round, which is going to be EVOS versus Supermassive and Flash Wolves versus Gambit. How do we think that these types of matches will go through? And I did VOD review for the coming teams, so I can talk somewhat intelligently about this. There we go.
So you probably know more about, because I've VOD reviewed EVOS's final, and then I'll bring it up, but Jonathan, you did like a brief primer of them. That's on Esports Heaven for EVOS. I was actually hoping, I said this in the last match, I was actually hoping for the EVOS Gambit matchup because I thought that would have been kind of interesting. Flash Wolves versus Gambit, I think Flash Wolves have this, despite the fact that I don't necessarily think Flash Wolves are like a super strong team. I think they have weirdly pretty good synergy between Muujin and Maple, which kind of surprised me because
after watching these games, I don't really agree with that. I don't know.
Okay.
It just seemed like, to me, Muujin was really hesitant, even when Maple had pushed, to get scuttle control, which I always like really identified flash flips for, right? Which was Carson, Maple. Carson gets the scuttle like on mid push, and then he can get control of both sides of the river. And so the team is really safe. He doesn't necessarily lose tempo for this because mid has so much control. So I didn't see that kind of thing as much from Mugen. Like even when his bot lane was pushing, he seemed really, really hesitant to go to scuttle. Even if like if the enemy jungle was stronger than him, like if the enemy jungle was like Xin Zhao, for example, in the first URX game, he was hesitant to go for scuttle control when his mid had push, almost like he was afraid that his mid laner wouldn't come, right? Even if they won the 2v2, it was like he was afraid that his mid laner wouldn't come. So that was kind of my issue with Mugen and Maple, but
okay.
I felt like they played really well off of bot push and getting bot vision.
Yeah.
I thought that their real strength was, even if they have losing mid and top, they will get so much vision around bot that if mid and top try to move to make a play on bot, their bot will just back up, and then their mid and top will push out, and they'll use that to make their own play on bot when their bot has the advantage. So I thought that like way around it was really interesting. However, I think that most intelligent teams will just make a play to their solos in those scenarios. So I feel like that plays well, however, into one of Gambit's biggest weaknesses, which is that they will probably just use their advantages in solos to play to bot if their bot is losing. And then Flash Wolves will have enough vision control that they won't, like, Flash Wolves' vision control is really good. I think their vision control is really strong, and maybe that's why you were thinking really highly of Mugen. But I put that
I think Maple does a lot for Mugen, I think is probably how I should have phrased it. Because I was expecting, and like they looked really rough at the beginning anyway, but I was expecting, maybe it was just, I wasn't expecting
just, like,
a lot.
Improve a lot is kind of how you feel about it? Maybe,
like, I wasn't expecting much out of Mugen, to be quite honest. I still don't think he's, like, particularly good. But Maple, he kind of goes back and forth between, you know, performing pretty well and then performing very poorly. And he's been performing better.
He's the new
and
gambler.
I think that, I think that reflects.
Karsa always called himself the gambler, so now Maple is the gambler. There you go.
I also think, Betty and Sword Art, the team. I mean, Sword Art in general, just I still value him really, really highly as a support, just generally. And so I think his play isn't to be underestimated, and I also think the team, Betty looks better, and the team knows how to play around that, like, to your point. They know how to play around bot side really well. For Gambit, I think they're going to run into some issues. I'm not sure if, because it's weird. Again, I don't think super highly of Mugen, but I also think that he's not going to, since he plays kind of passively as is, I don't think he's going to leave himself as open to some of the things that Diamond was able to exploit from teams in Group A. Especially if Maple does get the mid lane push on Kira. So that's something to watch out for too in terms of how the mid lane matchup goes for the jungle setup.
His willingness to just play Anivia could really backfire for them because Anivia hardly ever gets pushed pre-6.
Yeah.
So I feel like that kind of scenario, they could end up really losing control of their dragon, the bottom side of the jungle, like really fast if they just opt into the Anivia, which a lot of people are saying, why did they let Kira have Anivia twice? Well, Anivia is a champion that's pretty easy to play around if you don't get to super late game, so. But
yeah.
So I'm not sure. It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. I think a lot of Flash Wolves' tendencies that could backfire against them won't necessarily get punished by Gambit. I just like their vision control is so good. I always, whenever I haven't watched Flash Wolves for a while and I go back and I review some of their VODs, I'm just like, but this is so good. Like when they put the wards where they put, like, they're always transitioning wards as they're finishing one objective to the next objective.
Yeah.
They're always putting wards down like after back so that they can contest them. They're always putting wards on their strong side so that they have complete control. It's just really, really nice. So I love watching Flash Wolves for their vision control and setups like that.
So you are also picking Flash Wolves?
Yeah. I just think that a lot of the weird, cheesy invades and stuff that Gambit like to do probably won't work against a team that focused on vision.
Yeah.
And I think Gambit might give up their... If they get leads in top or mid, they probably will give them up to opt into Flash Wolves' patented let's play around bot, even though we have vision there. Ha. Haha, haha, haha. That's a good joke. I know my sense of humor is terrible. Anyway. Let's talk about EVO's Supermassive, which theoretically could be more interesting.
Yeah, I think this will likely be the closer series. EVOS is a very weird team to me. I'm not really sure, like we talked about how Flash Wolves play around bot side. I'm not really sure about EVOS's bot side of the map, not even just in general, but how they look at the map and play around bot side. They're probably, in my opinion, the least bot focused team in the group, from what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you would disagree with that, but
yeah, sure.
in terms of looking at these four teams, and then obviously the major region teams that are already on the main stage, I would say that EVOS is definitely the least bot-focused team, which doesn't always work in the current meta. So I'm very curious to see how they take on Supermassive, who I think, again, I called out Snowflower and what the team likes to do with him, unlocking him, but also like Zeetnot and Snowflower just generally have been a pretty strong bot lane within their region, and also were a strong bot lane relative to the teams in their group. So I definitely think that Supermassive should look at, again, attacking bot side and setting up around that more so than the rest of the map. I want to know what you thought of EVOS's jungler, Yijin. I think is how you pronounce his name.
Fine. I don't know. I was reviewing the final again, and I was really surprised that EVOS ended up winning it. I don't know, they just constantly seem to force everything. They went for Ejin in particular just goes for really dumb invades, like 24/7. I feel like this is a really common criticism, but so you guys have kind of probably gotten tired of hearing it, and you just think this is whatever, but like this guy is the worst. Of all of the junglers that I've seen so far at this event, he just like, why are you crossing that river? There's nothing there for you. They have push in both mid and bot. You're gonna die. Yep, you're dead. Okay, that was a fun time. And then they're winning like dragon fights from a deficit, and I was just, okay, well, yeah. I don't think this team is good. No offense.
I mean, I think
Vietnam, but
my opinion is that if Supermassive play like we saw them in their group, where they kind of they do have a slightly less aggressive early game than what I saw from them in Turkey, but they wait for their opponents to make mistakes or play around like incorrect pressure, stuff like that. I think that Supermassive will be able to punish that better than EVOS will be able to punish the mistakes that Supermassive have and the openings that they leave sometimes for opponents.
Yeah, I think that EVOS is just going to play into what everyone else has done against Supermassive so far by trying to take like some kind of weird cheese invade and then having that not be well executed and having the enemy team collapse on them and dying. So, and then Supermassive making trades for the other side, for other lanes, and having better overall vision control and setups. So I don't know. I don't think Evos will win this.
I also think that Supermassive, again, like something we saw from them here as well, is that they do like to have like multiple ways to not necessarily collapse, but like be able to affect their side lanes with globals, which I think is also something they'll probably use against Evos to kind of catch them when they do go for more aggressive skirmishes, which we saw them, again, punishing teams for in Group B. So I think that is another reason why they're probably super happy about this matchup, as they admitted, or as Fab Fabulous admitted, and I believe GBM also said, like, yeah, we want Evos because we could win. In terms of how, so like, I'm expecting Supermassive to go through, and I'm expecting Flash Wolves to go through. In terms of how these teams will do against the other 4 major region teams,
we'll talk about that
okay.
after we
know who goes through. Yeah.
Because we might change our minds or something like that. Also, how do you think Supermassive would have done against Flash Wolves, though?
I think that's more... So that's kind of why I wanted to see the Gambit Evos matchup, but then also the Flash Wolves Supermassive matchup, because I actually think that Flash Wolves are kind of similar to Supermassive in a lot of ways in terms of what they want to do and how they play around bot side pressure, but I think they do it better. So I think both of those series would have been probably closer than what we're going to get out of the matchups that were drawn, just due to the way both teams play. That's I'm kind of sad that we don't get to see that, though, because I think
if both Supermassive and Flash Wolves advance, we'll get to see it anyway.
Yeah, we'll get to see them play. Because yeah, I did want to see a best of 5 between these two teams, because I think that would really put in relief some of the mistakes that both teams make, because from watching them in their respective regions, I actually thought that they were kind of similar.
Sure, I can see that. Okay, that should be it for today. We'll talk again on Tuesday.
2 days.
Yeah. For the play-in knockouts. Thanks everyone for watching.